The most important decision you'll ever make will look like the worst one at the time. It will feel like choosing loss over safety, like walking deeper into a storm when the shelter is right behind you. And if you've been in a season where your loyalty to God and to the people He placed in your life seems to be costing you everything, this story is going to rewrite how you see that cost. Ruth was a Moabite. That detail matters more than most people realize. Moab was born from Lot's incestuous relationship with his daughter after the destruction of Sodom. The entire nation carried that stigma. Deuteronomy 23 verse 3 says it plainly, "No Ammonite or Moabite or any of their descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even in the 10th generation." Ruth came from a people who were, by law, excluded from God's community. She had every reason to believe she'd never belong, and yet she married into a family of Israelites who had settled in Moab during a famine. Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and their 2 sons had crossed the border looking for bread. The sons married Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. For about 10 years, life had a shape, a rhythm. Then death dismantled everything. Elimelech died. Both sons died. 3 widows remained, and in the ancient world, a widow without sons was a woman without a future. Naomi decided to return to Bethlehem. She'd heard the Lord had visited His people and given them food. But she told her daughters-in-law to go back to their mothers' houses, back to Moab, back to the familiar gods and the familiar safety. Orpah kissed Naomi and left. A reasonable choice, the smart choice, even. She went back to what she knew. Ruth refused, and the words she spoke in that moment, recorded in Ruth chapter 1 verses 16 and 17, are among the most fierce declarations of loyalty in all of Scripture. "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." She bound herself to a destitute old woman walking toward a country where Ruth would be an outsider by birth, by heritage, by law. So what was she actually choosing? Poverty, foreignness, the stigma of Moab stamped on her skin in a land that had explicit laws against her kind. She was choosing to be the lowest person in the room for the rest of her life. And she chose it anyway, because something in Naomi's God had gripped her heart in a way that Chemosh, the god of Moab, never had. That grip matters. Ruth's loyalty wasn't blind stubbornness or emotional attachment, it was theological. She saw something in the God of Israel, through Naomi's life, through Naomi's grief, through the way this broken woman still turned her face toward Bethlehem, that made Ruth willing to abandon every safety net she had. She traded certainty for covenant. And covenant, in biblical terms, is the most dangerous and most beautiful thing a person can enter. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. Naomi, once a woman of standing, came home empty. She even told the women of the town to call her Mara, bitter, because the Almighty had dealt bitterly with her. Picture the scene. 2 women with nothing, walking into a town that remembered them when they had everything. The humiliation was real. The hunger was real. Ruth went to glean in the fields. Gleaning was the ancient welfare system. Leviticus 19, verse 9 commanded landowners to leave the edges of their fields unharvested so the poor could gather what remained. Ruth was picking up leftovers behind the harvesters, backbreaking work under the sun, collecting grain stalk by stalk, hoping to bring home enough for 2 women to eat that night. She was doing the most menial labor available in that economy. And she did it without complaint, without bitterness, without demanding that God explain Himself. She happened to end up in the field of Boaz. Scripture says it almost casually in chapter 2 verse 3. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz. As it turned out, that phrase hides the fingerprint of God. Ruth didn't have a strategy. She didn't network her way to the right field. She showed up, she worked, and God's providence placed her exactly where her entire future would unfold. Boaz noticed her. He asked his foreman about her, and the report was simple. She's the Moabite who came back with Naomi. She asked permission to glean, and she's been on her feet since morning with barely a rest. Her reputation preceded her, a foreign woman known for her loyalty. Boaz told her to stay in his field, drink from his workers' water jars, and he commanded the young men to leave her alone. Then he said something in chapter 2, verse 12, that reveals he understood exactly what Ruth had done. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Under whose wings? That image, the wings of God as shelter, shows up throughout the Psalms. David used it, but Boaz spoke it over a Moabite gleaner who was covered in dust and barley chaff. He saw her faith before he saw her future. Naomi recognized the hand of God in this. She told Ruth that Boaz was a close relative, a kinsman redeemer, a man who under Israelite law had the right to buy back family land and marry the widow to continue the family line. The institution of the kinsman redeemer is one of the most striking pictures of Christ in the entire Old Testament. Someone with the right, the resources, and the willingness to redeem what was lost. What followed was Naomi's bold instruction: go to the threshing floor at night, uncover Boaz's feet, and lie down. In our modern ears, this sounds strange. In the ancient Near East, it was a formal act of requesting protection, placing yourself under someone's authority, asking them to spread their garment over you. Ruth was essentially asking Boaz to be the answer to his own prayer. You asked God to cover me with his wings. Now spread your wings over me. Boaz's response revealed his character. He called her act one of kindness, hesed, that deep Hebrew word for covenantal love and faithfulness. He told her in chapter 3 verse 10 that this kindness was even greater than what she'd shown Naomi, because she could have pursued younger men, wealthy or poor, but she came to him. He promised to redeem her. One obstacle remained. Another kinsman had a closer legal claim. The next morning, Boaz went to the town gate, the ancient courthouse, and sat down with the other kinsmen and 10 elders. He presented the case. The closer kinsman was willing to buy Naomi's land until he learned Ruth came with the deal. Marrying a Moabite widow to raise up an heir for the dead man's name would complicate his own inheritance. He backed out. Boaz stepped forward. Consider the weight of that gate scene. Ruth's entire future hinged on a legal proceeding she couldn't attend, decided by men she'd never met, in a system that technically excluded her. She had zero control. All she had was the faith that had carried her from Moab to Bethlehem, from the gleaning fields to the threshing floor, from the threshing floor to waiting. Waiting is the crucible God uses most often. And Ruth waited well. She'd done everything she could, shown loyalty, worked hard, followed wise counsel, made her request known, and then she sat still and let God move the pieces she couldn't reach. That pattern is woven through every story of redemption in Scripture. Your obedience covers one half, and God's sovereignty covers the other. Boaz married Ruth. She bore a son named Obed. The women of Bethlehem told Naomi that this grandson would be a restorer of life and a nourisher of her old age, and that Ruth, who loved her, was better to her than 7 sons. In a culture where sons were everything, that statement was almost scandalous. A Moabite daughter-in-law, better than 7 sons. Obed became the father of Jesse. Jesse became the father of David. And Matthew chapter 1 traces the genealogy of Jesus Christ, son of David, son of Abraham. And there, in verse 5, sits Ruth, a foreign woman from a cursed nation, gleaning leftovers in a borrowed field, now woven permanently into the ancestry of the Messiah. God didn't use Ruth despite her foreignness. He placed her story at the center of his redemptive plan because her loyalty in the lowest moment revealed the very character of the gospel itself. She left her homeland to follow a God she was learning to trust. She served in obscurity. She waited through uncertainty. She received grace from a Redeemer who had the right, the resources, and the heart to bring her in. Every element of her story points forward to Christ. The outsider brought into the family. The emptiness that becomes fullness, the loyalty that costs everything and gains what money could never buy. If you're in a season that looks like Ruth chapter 1, loss stacked on loss, walking toward an uncertain future, holding on to a God you can barely see, pay attention to what you're carrying. Your loyalty in the valley is seed in the ground. You can't see the harvest from where you're standing. Ruth couldn't see David from the barley field. She definitely couldn't see Jesus from the threshing floor. She saw the next step. She took it. Your faithfulness in the unseen season is the thing God builds kingdoms on. The moment you're tempted to turn back to Moab, to the old comforts, the familiar gods, the easier road, remember what Ruth carried in her empty hands when she walked into Bethlehem. She carried nothing but covenant loyalty. And God turned that into a bloodline that saved the world. The field you're gleaning in today has an owner you haven't met yet. Keep working,